Does New World respect your time? In many ways you can argue that it does. I honestly believe that Amazon's intent is not to waste your time. I think they're effectively doing that by accident. And they're doing it with busy work, and I'm finding it a little bit frustrating. Let me explain. Before we talk about this though, if you want to support me and help me grow the channel, becoming a YouTube member is truly the best way. Otherwise, consider giving me a little follow over on Twitch. I stream incredibly erratically. Okay, so we'll start with how New World actually does respect your time. And the main way is simply because it doesn't have very much vertical progression. A lot of the progress that you could have done at launch would still be relevant today, which is over a year after the game has been out. We did have the Umbral Shard system and the increase from gear score 600 to 625, but that was basically taking the gear you already had and then upgrading it. Now, that system did get introduced a little bit too early, but Amazon have recognized that and appreciate that. However, theoretically, this means that if you got really good gear at launch, it is still possibly worthwhile today to use it. It might not be best in slot because the perks have changed, the meta has changed and that kind of thing, but it would still be relevant. And I think that's a good thing in many ways. But if I'm honest, this is as far as I can go with saying that New World respects your time. It's not a game that demands your time day after day. You don't have to play for X amount of hours a day. You can play at your leisure. The only people who really do have to play at specific times are the people who are doing wars, and they've volunteered into that, and it's a small percentage of players. However, I think New World doesn't respect your time in quite a few significant ways. And one of the classic examples would be with the expertise system. Now, this isn't relevant to a lot of people who are at endgame right now, but this system is literally designed to slow you down. You're supposed to get to level 60, and before you get to the best in-slot gear, you have to go through this expertise grind. It's just there to essentially stretch out the endgame. Now, while the expertise grind is now much shorter and easier to control, I think it sucked at launch, and it still sucks now, just a little bit less. The next system to talk about is Umbral Shards. Now, when this first launched, I actually thought it was quite a good system. I actually enjoyed progressing through it. Everybody was doing mutations, we were all sort of on the same grind at the same time. It was sort of pleasurable for me for a little bit. However, my opinion on this has strongly changed. Once you have your first gear set at gear score 625, I think getting the next sets becomes effectively just a boring grind. Umbral Shards are a time tax on getting new gear, and I don't personally find that very fun. Let's say you got a whole new set of gear for whatever reason. Well, now you need to go ahead and upgrade it with, I don't know, like 80,000 Umbral Shards or something. A very high amount that would take quite a while to get. And if you've already done that grind once, doing it a second time, that isn't going to be very fun. Now, I may have the number of Umbral Shards wrong there. Don't quote me on it. I don't remember off the top of my head. In the short term, I would love some kind of discount if you've already been gear score 625 in a slot, so that upgrading costs less. Or with the gypsum system, if you're already expertise 625, then you get more Umbral Shards than you would have if you opened it at 600. What they could do is massively increase the amount of Umbral Shards you get from that system, thus effectively giving you a discount if you've already been there. That would be a simple thing I'm sure they could do almost overnight. In the long run, I actually think the Umbral Shard system needs to be ditched, or massively reworked, and maybe find other uses for the currency as well. However, I think this would require a massive gear overhaul, and I'm not expecting that anytime soon. Indeed, it might actually never happen. A little bit of a side note when we're talking about Umbral Shards, PvPers are getting left in the dust. The amount of Umbral Shards you get from pure PvP is pathetically low. Now, I know they wanted PvE mutations to be the main way you get them, but you still need them in PvP, so what you're doing is forcing PvPers to do PvE, and some people just don't want to do that. Just let the people who want to PvP give them more Umbral Shards. Throw the casual PvPers a little bit of a bone. They could 10x the amount that you get from Outpost Rush, for example. Again, they could do that overnight. Now, for the rest of the examples where I think New World doesn't respect your time, we're going to be talking about busy work. Let me explain. So we'll talk about PvE and mutations first. The requirements for getting into a M10 expedition at the moment are an absolute pain in the backside. Now, I do not actually blame players for this. I blame the game. The players just want to go through the expeditions quickly, effectively, and efficiently. And you have to keep in mind that it actually counts towards the weekly cap, so they don't want a wasted run. So I'm not blaming players. If you went on the expedition group finder and you looked at an M10, they all want the same thing. You have to link your gear, and your gear has to be ward gear, you need Bane weapons, and you need to have the relevant gems. They'd probably have you link the trophies if they could. So for those of you unfamiliar with what I've just spoke about there, let me explain. Each enemy in New World is a specific type. So for example, the undeads are called ancients, and the game takes into consideration the type of enemy that is doing damage to you. So Lazarus is ancients, Genesis is angry earth, the rest of them are barnacles is lost, and then I think the rest is corruption. So if you're doing Lazarus, for example, people will generally want 5 ancient ward gear. Ward gear is effectively a stat that means you take less damage from that enemy type. So if I have ancient ward gear, the ancients are literally doing less damage to me. So you need that perk on all of your armor. And you're probably going to have to be light gear, by the way, at the moment, because that's the method that people just want to blast through it. And don't forget that this ward gear has to be gear score 625 because you're doing an M10. And then you will also need a Bane weapon. So it'll be a weapon that the enemy is weak to, and there will be a perk that is Ancient Bane, which means it does more damage against that enemy type. For the gems, the mutations do a little bit of extra damage, so some of them are like fire, nature, void, for example. So what people will do is they expect you to change all of your gems on your armor to one that is resistant to that damage type. Now, sometimes you can get away with just having opal gems and then changing your amulet, but some people will not understand what's going on there and just reject you. You also have trophies, which basically just increase the amount of damage you do against that type, but they have to be in your houses and people can't really link that, so they don't really check that. But you're sort of expected to have it, right? Now, some people will find getting all of that kind of gear super fun, but I personally do not. Now, if I'm in the minority there, then I don't think it should be changed. But I do think that most people might actually agree with me, but I'm a little bit convinced that the people who are doing it now are probably suffering a little bit from Stockholm Syndrome. Yes, tongue-in-cheek, but I actually think this. If you've already done all the hard work to get the ward gear, to get the Bane, to get to 625, and you're already swapping gems and you're already enjoying it getting a lot of shards, you're probably not inclined for it to change, right? But I think it's actually causing people not to want to do mutations and expeditions, and I think that's just stupid. I think we actually should just be allowed to do it almost quite freely. To me, it's an absolute faff, and I really don't like it. But it gets worse, right? So I'm just talking about one ward type there. As I mentioned, there's currently 4 different types of expedition: Ancient, Corrupted, Lost, Angry Earth, for a total of 8 expeditions at the moment, I believe. Now, at any given time, there's 2 mutations up, but effectively you might need to do it for 4 different types of enemy types. So if you're just playing like a heavy build and you want to do all of the expeditions, you need 4 gear sets. If you want to do heavy build and a medium build for the same weapons, you need 8 gear sets. Personally, a lot of this video is born out of the frustration that I had a heavy gear set of heavy ward gear, but people were saying, oh, you need to do medium or light, and so I had to change, and I just didn't find that process very fun. Yes, I went ahead and bought it, then I had to use the shards, and it was just very, very awkward. I mean, this whole thing is actually made a little bit more stupid by the fact that New World doesn't have any gear set storage or gear set management. Now, we know that is coming, but to me that will be a band-aid on a bigger problem. Requiring all these gear sets just to be one kind of player in 4 different expeditions, I find really painful. The quick simple fix is to make ward gear to be just one type. The way that resilient is a PvP stat, ward gear could be the PvE stat rather than it being per type. If you combine that with the discount for having 625 gear already with Umbral Shards, I think you're on the right path. But for me, it wouldn't go far enough in the long run. My point though is that this stuff just isn't respecting your time. Some people will like it, sure, but I think most people it's just a problem. Some people just want to get into the content. The game is fun, let people play it. But you can't play it unless you've done a massive checkbox exercise, and I find it frustrating. Honestly, gearing from heavy to medium for Lazarus this week, it just made me almost quit doing expeditions completely. Not because of failed runs or people being annoying, but just because of all the faff that I had to deal with. Yes, I'm slow, some people already have their gear. I've been mostly doing PvP, but I thought, oh, I'll actually try and get into mutations. It sort of seems fun. Ah, boy, was I wrong. If you've already done it, you already have all the gear sets that you want. Fair enough, I respect you, I very much appreciate you guys, and it would be a shame to take that away from you. But for me, it's a crap system and they should change it. But other areas of the game also suffer from this faff, this busy work that just annoys you. Crafting is effectively the same. Now, crafting, if I'm honest, is half sort of like a timed gold gate, and then the other half is faff and chance. So to craft gear score 600 items, you need a few different things. You need the max 200 skill in that profession, you need a full set of clothing, you need the food, you need to have the 3 max trophies, and you need to have a house in a town that has a town buff up. Now, some of this is a deliberate gate to effectively stop max level crafting all the time. Like having to change your gear is just annoying. By the way, I really don't like trophies as a concept. It sounds interesting on paper, but in reality I find them really quite boring. It's basically a set of passives that cost you gold. I know a lot of people seem to like them, but I just find them incredibly dull, and I wouldn't necessarily mind it so much if the bonuses were really small and insignificant. However, you need them for crafting, for example. But that's trophies, that's another conversation, I guess. Okay, so let's say you've got all that stuff to craft, you've got it all set up, and then you start crafting, and crafting is gambling. Gamble crafting isn't respecting your time, it's respecting your gold. However, I do appreciate that it is basically a balancing mechanism in the current gear system. It's to stop people having best in slot gear very easily and very cheaply. And again, I think that ultimately needs a massive overhaul rather than having like any kind of short-term fix. But I won't dwell on that here. Suffice to say though that gathering is sort of similar. To be super efficient is actually quite annoying. You want to have the music buff, you need to take a potion, you need to get the right tool. Ideally you do it in a territory that your faction controls. You might even move your house to a town that has the buff that you want. You might even try and take Brimstone Fort. It's just a pain in the backside. It's a lot of faff to try and maximize your efficiency. Now it's worth pointing out that gathering's a little bit different, right? Because the PvE mutations, you basically have to do all the faff if you want to participate in the high levels. For crafting, you have to do all that faff if you want to get 600 gear score. For gathering, you don't have to. You're just being a little bit less efficient. So I mind it a little bit less with gathering, but it's still just busy work. And that's the whole point. New World is effectively built on busy work rather than doing the content. Some of it is actually like intentional gating, but for me, the gating isn't rewarding enough. It doesn't feel good enough to exist. It actually feels like super awkward and frustrating. It feels like a lot of MMOs, for example, will have a system where you go into a dungeon, a raid or whatever, something drops and you're like, oh my god, I just got this new item. New World never really seems to have that. The only people who ever really feel like that are the gamble crafters who luckily get something amazing. The rest of the game system is effectively busy work. Now we know a lot of this is going to be improved. For example, the number of mutations is going to drop from 10 to a much lower number. I think that's actually positive because it's all spread out right now, effectively making it harder to progress. I suspect at some point ward gear may actually get combined into just one stat. And obviously we are getting gear set management, which will help all of this completely. But for me, these are just short-term fixes for massive underlying problems. New World on the surface looks really good for casuals because of that lack of vertical progression. Once you have everything, you basically have everything you need. It's just a case of moving stuff around. They don't really ever take it away from you. And in that sense, it's good. The treadmill, if you will, moves very slowly. The problem for me is that the treadmill is on a slope and there's somebody throwing poop at you as you're trying to run. All the while, there's some other people convincing you that what you're doing is actually super fun. And I just don't think it is. I think there's too much poop and I think the treadmill is too much on a vertical slant. Now, by the way, I should have put this at the start. I still like New World, I like the combat, but if I'm honest, I'm sort of probably done with PvE. I'm just going to just play PvP and maybe gather because I need that gold. Everything else, I just don't think I can be bothered participating. I'm just finding it really frustrating. Maybe I'll change my mind once we get gear sets, but let's wait and see. Now this video was an absolute monster. Very long for me. I don't normally do them this long, but this is just a topic that's absolutely doing my head in at the moment. Mainly because it was like, I want to do an end game expedition. Oh, there's so much stuff I need to do to get there. And I thought I'd already done all that stuff. I already had a gear set that was 625. I was already sort of happy. But then it's like, oh, we need ward gear. Or you need Bane. Or you need to change your gems. Now, some people were doing this already. Some people already have this stuff. But for me, I was just like, oh, that's a bit of a faff. I'm really not sure I can be bothered. And I was like, if I'm feeling this, surely some other people are feeling this as well. Now, some people out there will already have all that stuff and you might not think it's a problem. But I think really for anybody coming into the game, they're going to run headfirst into these problems and be like, why are they a thing? And I really hope that Amazon make them not a thing as soon as possible. Yeah, long one there. I do apologize. If you want to support me and help me grow the channel, becoming a YouTube member is truly the best way. As I said, if you don't want to do that, then do consider coming and following me on Twitch. I stream really erratically because there's no set schedule. I just do it when I have time, but it would be great to see you over there nonetheless. Let me know your thoughts on this video. I suspect it might be controversial, but I'm very intrigued in what you would say. Let's be friendly. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.